Oh,
Oh,
Jacob, so not too far from you.
Yeah, right.
so the bees probably don't cluster like they do here, but probably slow down a bit. Do you see a similar cycle that you would with overwintering bees in the snow like we do here?
Well, I was a beekeeper in the Midwest, and if the term is turbidity, may not be saying it correctly, but there's not the kind of slowdown clustering that you would see in like the Midwest or somewhere. So if there's for example, a warm day, or if we see something that's managed to bloom, we'll see bees on it anytime during that January through March period. I don't know if you've seen the same thing, Jacob.
Yeah, my bees were out every day except when on the very few days when it was really rainy.
Wow, that's nice.
So,
That gives you a lot more management room to make different types of management decisions when you can actually open your hives, through the winter, as opposed to
yeah,
here where it's, I don't know, -10, and we just gotta
right,
let
right.
it.
You just have to cross your fingers for a while, right?
Yeah, cool. Well, but we're glad to have the Californians on here with us. Um, One thing that I wanted to do today was I spent 2018 and 2019 conducting a survey whenever I would give extension presentations with beekeepers, farmers, and landowners. And this is data I plan to publish here pretty soon, but it's not data that I've presented to folks before. So I thought it could be an interesting conversation starter. And I just threw together 10 slides. So I'll probably just take up 15 minutes and then we can get back to shooting the breeze about the bees. But I thought it would be cool to share some of the social research that I had done. So maybe I'll go ahead and jump into that. Okay. All right. So from February 2018 to January 2020, I gave extension talks around the state of Iowa. And in each group, I would give a similar talk where I talked about what our research was showing about the landscape effect on honeybee and wild bee health. So I also talked to them, if they were landowners, I talked to them about different land management practices that are out there for increasing diversity and increasing pollinator forage on their land. If they were farmers, I talked to them about best management practices when applying insecticides, and also different programs that are out there like prairie strips and just prairie in general that provide better forage for bees, but also have beneficial effects for farmers, including reducing nutrient runoff and reducing erosion and that sort of thing. And then, of course, I talked about beekeepers. I was really interested in learning more about what Iowa beekeepers are doing in terms of management practices, what their primary concerns are, where they're keeping their hives, that sort of thing. So I'm going to mostly talk about what the beekeeper feedback was, and go through some of those slides. So of the talks that I gave, we had quite a few beekeepers respond. It was a paper survey that I gave to them after each presentation. So it kind of went hand in hand with the presentation I gave. So the first thing I wanted to know was how many bees did these beekeepers keep? How many colonies did these beekeepers have? So from these responses, we can see that the majority of the people I was talking to were folks with backyards of bees. So probably like quite a few of you looking in the chat, it seems like people had one hive, two hive, 10 hives, and that seemed to be the range where most people were. The grand majority of folks had between 1 and 10 hives. So that meant that I had very few commercial folks. So looking at the rest of the responses, these are folks that just have a handful of hives, mostly what would be put in the category of backyard beekeeper rather than commercial or sideline. Oh, that's not a good image. But what habitat do you keep your hives at? So I asked them to identify what was nearby in their hives. They could select all that applied. And the most common things here in Iowa that people selected, about 50% of the selections were corn and soybean. So the majority of folks, and again, Iowa is in the whole state, 85% of our land is devoted to agricultural production. So it's pretty much impossible to keep your hives somewhere where there aren't corn and soybean nearby. I think that this is probably pretty similar in eastern Nebraska as well. This informs us because we know that most beekeepers have their hives near agricultural lands. So it's important to promote different activities that are going to increase communication between beekeepers and farmers, and making sure that farmers know about best management practices that are going to be better for pollinators. And then some of the other sites that people identified, a little bit of prairie, forested area, fruit trees. So, but 50% was corn and soybeans. I asked beekeepers to indicate their level of concern about the 3 primary honeybee stressors that I talked about in my presentation. So we talked to beekeepers about the main stressors that are affecting our bees are, well, insecticides, which a lot of people seem to know about, but then also pathogens, which would be varroa or viruses, European foul brood, all those things lumped together in the same category of pathogens. And then poor forage. So concerns about there not being enough pollen and nectar resources for their bees. We call those 3 stressors the 3 Ps. So pesticides, pathogens, poor forage. And it seemed that most people were extremely concerned about pathogens. And I think that's specifically Varroa. I think if you talk to most beekeepers, they're pretty concerned about Varroa. That was probably the one that they were most concerned about. Then secondarily, they were concerned about insecticides. This is probably the second most. But if you look at the extremely category, people weren't particularly concerned about forage availability, which was interesting to us at the university because our research is showing that in Iowa, it can be difficult to find areas with good forage for your bees, especially when you're near an agricultural site. We placed hives at agricultural sites versus more wildlife landscapes where there's prairies. And we see that the prairies have a positive effect, especially in the late season on our hives. So this, for me, as the extension person here in Iowa, is an indicator that maybe I need to do more extension programming around searching out good sites and the importance of forage availability whenever we're selecting our apiary sites. This might not affect everybody. Do you currently register for Driftwatch? About 2/3 of our folks, about 2/3 of our folks had registered for Driftwatch. As I've talked about before, here in Iowa, we have a higher usage among beekeepers of the Driftwatch website because for us, it acts as our apiary registry for the state. We also have laws that state that if you have registered your apiary with the state of Iowa and you do get a dead out if you get a pesticide kill in your hive, then you're able to take legal action. So there's an incentive here in Iowa for beekeepers to register their hives on this website, whereas in Nebraska, I don't think that they have an apiary registry like we do. So people are kind of wary of signing up for a website. It seems like an extra activity that's unnecessary. So this was helpful to inform me that a lot of people knew about Driftwatch. And in a follow-up question, it asked folks if they didn't use it, why not? And the majority responded that they just never heard of it before. So since we started using Driftwatch as our main state apiary registry in 2017, we were concerned that people wouldn't want to use it out of concerns of privacy, of letting people know where their hive sites were. But it turned out that the majority of people weren't using it because they just didn't know about it yet, and that the privacy concern wasn't as big of a deal. I asked beekeepers if they thought that if they have access to prairie habitat, and quite a few of them, most of them somewhat agreed or strongly agreed. I also asked them if they felt like their hives had adequate forage, and most of them somewhat agreed or strongly agreed with that statement. Very few disagreed with that statement, which kind of correlates back to most of them saying that poor forage wasn't a major concern for them. But it's interesting because the majority of the apiary sites were there in agricultural lands. So they were there with soybean, they were out there with corn, which don't provide it's not the best forage, but it seems to be the best of maybe what's available in a 10-mile radius for our bees. So yeah, the majority of people felt like in terms of forage availability, their bees were doing fine. And that's the beekeeper data. Real quick, I just threw these slides in, talking to farmers, just to give a quick recap. A lot of farmers already participated in the conservation reserve program, which allowed them to put more a higher diversity of things like prairie or other beneficial plantings that could affect pollinators on their land. What else? They identified different areas of pollinator habitat was what they were doing prior to my presentation. After my presentation, most of them wanted to follow the Iowa bee rule, which is the rule that says that they can't spray an agricultural field that's blooming during the day if there's an apiary registered within a mile radius. So most people, a lot of farmers didn't know about that rule here in Iowa and were interested in following it after my presentation. Some other stuff that they thought would be easy to do to improve pollinator health would be establishing habitat and managing insecticide drift. But the most important thing is that fourth one in the corner, D. I asked farmers, how important is the implementation of pollinator-friendly practices to you? And I think I was expecting a lot of them to push back and say, you know what, really, I don't care. But the overwhelming majority, almost everyone, said that it was somewhat important or very important to them, which I find heartening as someone who talks to beekeepers all the time. A lot of beekeepers are worried about pesticide kills, and it's good to know that farmers in Iowa feel like it's something important and they need to care about.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Back on that D, how come the percentages don't add up to 100?
This is the number of responses. So it's the total number of responses from the farmers rather than.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. And then it would be the same thing. Landowners, actually, I don't know if I included that on here, but landowners also, even more than farmers, said that they thought implementing pollinator-friendly practices was somewhat important or very important to them. The practices that they were interested in implementing, including allowing beekeepers access to their land for forage. So a lot of these landowners have large swaths of land that they've either put into the conservation reserve program and established new prairie or things like that. So one thing that we're trying to work on here in Iowa is creating better communication between maybe urban folks that want to keep bees but don't want to do it in the city, or they live in an apartment and don't have land to do it. And then landowners that live outside the city that have all this great land with all this flowering habitat that are interested in inviting beekeepers on their land to keep bees there. With the Conservation Reserve Program, the USDA has said that it's a-okay to keep bees on Conservation Reserve Program lands. So that's a connection that we're trying to foster here. What else? Level of agreement with the following statements. Oh yeah, that's where it says that most people strongly agreed that it's important to implement pollinator-friendly practices. So that's just a general rundown of what the survey I did for 2 years kind of talked about, and a little bit about how it's informing what kind of approach we're taking to talking to farmers, landowners, and beekeepers about best management practices. Yeah.
So Randall, what were some of the reasons why they thought participating in CRP was, there was a big blue bar, saying it was very difficult to, and then there was like topics. One of them was participate in CRP. Did they indicate why they felt that was extremely challenging? The other one made sense. It was like controlling dust off from seed treatments.
Right. Let me go to it. So this is landowners, right? How difficult?
Yeah, and even the other one too, the farmers also mentioned that it was difficult. So go back to the previous slide with the farmers. They both indicated participate in CRP is very difficult.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that is because there are limited contracts for the Conservation Reserve Program. And Iowa is one of the top states for CRP contracts, I think. They get a lot of them here. And so oftentimes talking to the folks at NRCS that manage the CRP contracts, it sounds like they have a limited amount according to the Farm Bill, And so once the farm bill comes out, it dictates how much funds will be devoted to each type of CRP program. So there's a CRP program that's focused specifically on pollinator habitat restoration. There's another one that's focused specifically on wetland restoration. There's a lot of different designations. Pasture land, I think, maybe not pasture land, but and so once those contracts start running out, I remember when I started my job, I was talking to folks at NRCS and they said, it's great that you're promoting CRP, but right now we only have wetland contracts left and not everybody's able to implement that. So I think that farmers might see it as something that you have to kind of get in on at the right time. And that makes it a little bit difficult since the contracts get nabbed up pretty quickly.
Yeah, because the B graph says that participate in CRP, most of them said not at all likely. Like a lot of them said slightly likely, but that's probably because they haven't looked into, what it takes yet.
Right, but if you look of the kind of list of different in the A graph of the list of the different practices I put out there, participating in CRP was one of the top ones that people said they were already doing.
Oh, I see. So they're not at all likely because they're already doing it.
That could be the case, or it could be the opposite. People who aren't already doing it are saying it's difficult.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That's really interesting, though. It gives a better insight as to where some of those disincentives and those challenges are.
And with the farmers, one thing I thought, so coming out of grad school where I was an agriculture agronomy student, IPM was it. And to come out of a grad school and see farmers say that using an IPM plan isn't high on their priorities, I found that interesting.
Yeah, after decades of pushing IPM.
Right, it's kind of all for nothing. Or no, but it's something that's not high on their priority list, or maybe it just hasn't been framed to them in the right way. Maybe they don't realize that some of the things that they're doing already kind of qualify somewhat as IPM. Yeah, that was a good question.
Jacob said, said, great idea. We find many people who say they'd enjoy keeping bees, but they live in an apartment. That must have been to a previous comment.
Yeah, I didn't catch the details, but there was mention of some idea of matching people to this set aside land.
Yes,
Did I hear that right?
There are a lot of landowners that aren't necessarily farmers, but they're people that have land and they're interested. They say, hey, we have all this space. It'd be great pollinator habitat if someone wants to keep their bees here. So I get emails of people saying, can you connect me to a beekeeper to drop their bees here or to let them know that they could come? And then I have vice versa, folks in cities saying, I want to keep bees, but I don't have a place to do it. Do you know of, anyone in my area that has land? And I'm still, it's something that we've talked about doing, but we're not sure about the best way to do it, whether or not we create some sort of message board on our website where someone can pop in and say, hey, I live in this area and I have this acreage, or beekeepers can check it. I usually just guide the landowners that contact me, I guide them to the closest beekeeping club to them, so that they can reach out and maybe find someone nearby that's looking for land.
If you were building a system from scratch with infinite resources to do that, you could do a lot worse for a model than an online dating service.
We used to joke about that. We would create like a dating app that was like, Tinder, where you can swipe through and see, people take pictures of their landscapes and you can swipe it through the different prairies. And
I've got some pollinator habitat that likes to take long walks on the beach. And
yeah, exactly.
Well, I do have some stats too. You want me to pull that up too?
Sharing.
So if you guys have any other questions, please, you can unmute yourself or feel free to send us a chat question.
The thing about matching people who want to keep bees and don't have a place to put it, Iowa has a thing for deer hunters like that, where you can check with the state's DNR for people who don't have a place to hunt and people who have too many deer on their land to try and match them up. So the bee one would work really good, I would think.
I'm gonna write that down. I'm gonna Google that. It's the Iowa DNR provides that, connects hunters to land to hunt on.
Correct.
Okay.
It's been 3 years ago, but there was a company in Madison, Wisconsin that essentially had a model. They would place beehives in people's backyards and the people paid a fee. And
Oh, Bee
then the
Squad.
guy, pardon me?
Is that with Minnesota, the Bee Squad?
No,
No.
this was an entrepreneur.
It's a
Oh,
business.
okay.
I've heard of this too.
And then he would
They're
sell
actually
the
popping up in a
honey.
lot of places. There's one in Boston. I think it's called Better Bee. There's one in Vancouver, who they actually do a sexy beekeeper calendar every year. The one out of Vancouver, they have a nude beekeeping calendar with strategically placed frames in the photos. Yeah, that's one actual business model that I was talking to one of my colleagues at the Des Moines Botanical Gardens about doing, because he was interested in increasing more resources for urban folks that want to keep bees.
The last thing I would add is he also sold the honey as kind of microclimate specialty honey, and it was at the super premium end of the local market. So it was seemed to be a fairly decent business model. So
Yeah, I'm interested to learn more about it. That's for sure. I wonder how much these folks pay, because Judy, at University of Minnesota, they do a similar thing, right? They generate revenue by keeping hives at I don't know, like eco businesses and things like that, right?
Yeah, they've got a couple different kind of sponsorship programs. One in which they do all the beekeeping and you get some honey at the end, or one in which I think you get to come out and kind of work your bees for less visitation or something like that. Yeah.
So
so there was a good question about feeding 1-to-1 syrup, and yeah, you can definitely start feeding your syrup. It doesn't look like it's going to get cold again, and if you can do some reversals, sometimes we hold off on feeding if there's still full boxes of food. Sometimes these bees will come in, and in the spring they'll be completely empty on top, but they still have a full box of honey on bottom, and so that sometimes we will redistribute some of the food, or we'll do a full reversal and let them eat some of that out before we start feeding. This was just every year before we do our beekeeping class, I just kind of pulled together some stats to show, commercial operations and backyard and sideliner beekeepers have very different scales to work with and very different issues to work with. So there's a lot of things that commercial operations have managed or kind of streamlined and really don't have as much issues, but we do have either issues or misdiagnosis of issues that really kind of are a little bit more problematic for new beekeepers and small scale beekeepers. Just for Nebraska, this is kind of an overview of the last 13 years. It's kind of just every report kind of pulled together. But if we look at it separately by year, I just want people to recognize that each year there's different issues that beekeepers have to kind of be aware of. Sometimes it's seasonal, and sometimes it's more related to how well they overwintered, or kind of results from last season's successes or failures. And so each year it's a little bit different. And this last year was reported to be a lot of queen failures, which makes sense because we also had a lot of late swarms. And think about it, the year before we had some pretty good overwintering success. And so what follows, if you have really strong overwintered hives coming in spring, and we're not careful about swarming, we're not careful about splits, reversals, and swarm management, then you can get in this case where you can't keep up with the colonies. They swarm on you, and they kind of, continue to swarm throughout the season a bit. So I think that this might have been due to a lot of beekeepers noticing queens replacing themselves, or queens swarming late. So unfortunately, it doesn't tell you exactly how those queens failed, but It's kind of interesting to watch year to year how these different states are reporting it. If you want to look up your own state, it's all, graphs that you can play around with year, by state, so it's all right there. You can look it up in the Bee Informed Partnership. And then I'll just go through this really quick. I don't think you guys, there's questions about this. So I think you guys might need to just kind of review this really quickly. Right now, we've removed our winter wraps. We removed all that winter equipment. We need to assess, whether we need to reduce that entrance or not. Most of them have been reduced because they're small and they're kind of, susceptible. So we also clean out that bottom board debris, but we make a note of the bottom board debris to kind of figure out some information about the colony, why it died, or even whether it has some good hygienic behaviors. We also, depending on where you are, sometimes you have these cold snaps. So you do want to wait till you have a nice warm day to go out and inspect your hives. And I would, at this time, do reversals if you can, and feed if you need to. Don't overfeed because there's a lot of pollen right now. So I know a lot of beekeepers like to throw on pollen patties because they think that's going to help. But sometimes if there's a lot of natural pollen sources, bees aren't going to take it. And then it just becomes like extra food for beetles and pests and other things. And a waste of money, really. Then we always do health assessments to see if we need to combine colonies, split colonies, reverse colonies, assess mite loads, and then, do things for swarm management. These are usually common reasons why bees die. And Randall said he wanted to kind of see some of the slides from this dead out talk. So I'm not going to give you all of the dead out talk, but because it's 40 minutes, but I do think when you guys open up colonies and you're looking and assessing the winter losses, don't get discouraged. Oftentimes beekeepers don't like to see a pile of dead bees and quickly throw their dead, bees out of the bottom board and just scrape everything like you're just quickly trying to wipe it from your memory. But I encourage people to kind of slow down and don't clean up too fast, because you can actually examine your dead out to see why they died and then see if that can be fixed or improved through management. Was there something I did wrong that I can improve for next year? And if you kind of throw everything away and construct your hive apiaries, then there's really no ability to really assess more than did they die or they live. The why question, I think, is important. Things that we look for in the winter, we look for live bees, dead bees out front, what's in the entrance, signs of activity, robbing activity from the previous fall, potential water imbalance issues or nosema issues, signs of fecal smearing or dysentery. Those are all things that we see in the winter. Sometimes you see signs of starvation, and that's with the little abdomens and the cells right up. And that's sometimes it's they run out of food, or if you don't get food syrup on early enough, sometimes there's just not enough time for the bees to move it and cure it. So sometimes in the fall, we recommend people check your feed regularly and then replace or shift the empty combs from the center if they haven't filled it with food, because essentially you're just creating empty cells. They're going to cluster and they're going to end up without stores. I also encourage people to look and see some of the colonies that have abdomens up and some of them that don't. It's not strictly starvation, so it's kind of confusing as to why they might have died. I always then look for the cluster. Is there evidence of a cluster? What's the size of that cluster? What's the number of those clusters, the location of those clusters? What was that cluster of dead bees on when they died? When their last, whatever, when they all froze, what resources or frame locations were they on? So going into winter, a lot of times we want the honey to be filled, the bees to be on there. And I think this talk was meant to be kind of in the winter. Oftentimes we open it up and the bees are like this, but they're also dead and full of honey. Like they died, they had food. Why did they die? So that's why I think the clusters and kind of assessing where they died and what are the symptoms of those clusters telling you as kind of clues is what was going on in the fall. So here's a great example of that. There's a photo of the frame. It's pulled out. These are dead bees. This is what I'm calling a microcluster. And I'm going to speed through this just because what I think is happening in the Midwest is that there's clustering of the bees in the winter, but then there's these rapid warming. There's these huge temperature spikes up and down in our area where sometimes it's a 30-degree shift. But there's these warming and the bees will uncluster. And I think that they're also reclustering when the temperatures go down. So I think what's happening is when they recluster, some of them might not be making it all the way back to the main cluster. And I see signs of that where they might be falling down to the bottom board, or they might be actually dead on the colony just as a little micro cluster of dead bees. So I think that's what's happening in our Midwest areas. The winters are harder here than in Minnesota because of that warming up and down, up and down. So this might be a good indication for you to kind of notice, is my colony suffering from this micro clustering? Do I need to add wraps to it? Do I need to insulate a little bit better so that the cluster isn't, or am I wrapping it too much? You know, so did I keep the wrap on too long where there was a significant warming and they just kind of unclustered and then they had to, you know, drop and then they reclustered. So these are things that we're kind of looking into in terms of microcluster responses. So here's a great example of another microcluster. I'm going to try to draw on this. There's the cluster is actually, oh, where's my, there we go. The cluster is right here, but there, you know, there's another cluster right here. And essentially it's not big enough to retain heat as an entire whole cluster. So what you are actually seeing is two little microclusters that probably just couldn't retain enough heat to not freeze. So, you know, the colony unfortunately got separated with a frame in between, but if they kept together, they probably would have been able maybe to retain heat a little bit better. This is a nice little microcluster found away from the main cluster. Anybody have a clue as to why I think that? Sorry, ignore the screaming kids. If you guys aren't familiar, you know, with these kind of analyses, that's why I always say, look at the bottom board for clues. So what I'm showing here is what we have is this funny little cluster right here. But where's the majority of the dead bees? It's like back over here. And that cluster, if I put the frame back, would be over here. So I know that this is a little microcluster that eventually probably died, but the majority of the bees probably died pretty early over here somewhere, you know, and the small colony just kind of was dragging, leaving, and then just kind of petered out. So what else can you kind of tell from dead bee at the bottom board? I really like and encourage people to look at your bottom boards because this is a great way to kind of assess what happened to the colony. Here's two colonies of similar size and two very different looking bottom boards. And this is essentially both dead outs. I'm trying to figure out why my colony died, and I'm looking to investigate signs of why this kind of would die. In one colony, I've got that picture that you saw where there's a small micro colony and a big cluster down at the bottom board. In the other colony, I've actually got quite a lot of brood still remaining and a small tiny cluster left, but nothing really on that bottom board. So in October, the hive health records show that in colony A, I had 12 frames of bees, 6 frames of brood. And then in colony B, I had 8 frames of bees and about a half a frame of brood. Which do you think died of mites and which do you think died of starvation? Feel free to guess, anybody.
The large colony died of mites.
Folks in the chat are saying that the first colony A died of mites.
Colony A died of mites. And which bottom board?
The one with the most dead bees.
Yeah, that's what I would assume as well. But actually, colony A is that one. And even though in the fall there was 12 frames of bees and 6 frames of brood, there is definitely not the amount of dead bees that you would anticipate to see. So you're absolutely right. It was a Varroa issue, but it was a Varroa issue in the fall, not a Varroa issue in the winter. It's very likely that that colony was already on its way out before the winter even came, given how much remaining brood is in that colony. Take a look at how much brood, just kind of brood chill. There was probably still 4 or 5 frames of brood that never emerged, indicating there wasn't enough workers to keep them warm and keep them healthy enough to come out. So that colony was probably dead before they even went into winter.
Sorry for interrupting, Judy.
Yeah, go ahead.
How do you tell that they died from Varroa? Do you have other data you kept on that hive, or do you look for mites in the frozen kind of, how do you do that?
Yep, I'm going to do that right now. So this right here is also, this is the colony that's starved. And because they're all clustered in a corner, they're actually clustered. And then the frames, unfortunately, I don't have the pictures. There are evidence of bees that kind of are in with their butts out inside, but then most of them kind of probably died in the cluster and just kind of dropped right there. But they're dying kind of in a pile because they were clustered. So that's an indication that they died during a clustering. I actually do have that. Let me see if I can, I have to actually unshare those slides. I think I hid them. Hold on. Okay, there you go.
So Judy, from your slides, it seems like there's a few different ways you're identifying the reasons for the colony loss. One would be Varroa, one would be starvation, and then one would be kind of freezing as a result of these microclusters and the temperature fluctuation.
Exactly. This colony example is just a really big one. It was so big, we actually tried to overwinter in 3 because there's so much brood, 23 frames of bees, 6 frames of brood, still full boxes of honey after it's dead. Again, this is a dead out. Dead queen plus a small cluster found in the middle of the box on a honey frame. So it probably didn't starve, and it likely did not have a weak population, and it did see some fecal smearing. You see that there? But this is also another picture of that cluster. You can see the queen. What else do you see that's indicative of a mite issue? There's still brood. This colony was late brooding. Yeah, sorry. You can hear our strong-willed kids. So signs of Varroa problems that you might be able to look for is that those dead bees hold really still for you. So this is an excellent time to kind of scan for mites and dead deformed wing bees and Varroa feces left in the frame. So you can turn it upside down and look on the underside to see that crystalline weird debris, and that would be Varroa feces. You do have to kind of be careful because sometimes the bees will chew out honey cell cappings, and that wax looks like debris, but you'll see very distinctly that mite feces is different. Here's a perfect example of, holding still. You've got lots of bees and mites and lots of Varroa feces here down below. Other places to look for mites when you're breaking open the boxes, you can just look for them. Sometimes they're still just crawling around looking for bodies. Sometimes they're right on the frame, so I don't know if you can see it, but it's right there. It's like a Where's Waldo? And then normally I let people draw and find them, but for the sake of time, there you go. There's the Varroa mite and a small hive beetle. Okay, so other places to find mites, the most easiest place is, again, your bottom board. So this is the bottom board of that big colony, and the reason why I know it died of mites is because that's what the bottom board looked like, in addition to what the frames look like. And I saw varroa on the combs and the honey. I also saw it on the bottom board. So what's happening here is I don't think that my treatment failed. I think what happened was that the treatments needed to continue because the brooding was still happening. I mean, you saw that the stats in October, they still had 6+ frames of brood. And that was already after a lot of our treatment. So a lot of those mites came out and just kind of really, mites that are infecting bees during development have smaller fat stores and less of those critical overwintering proteins they need to overwinter. So they're already entering the winter less robust. They call them skinny bees instead of fat bees. And then on top of that, you've got the viruses that these mites might be vectoring that causes another hit on their immune system or their, their physical health. So you can see, how it can just kind of accumulate. And then this is a colony, I think, died of mites in the winter, as opposed to the other colony that died of starvation and the other one that died in the fall. Does that help?
Judy, we have a question in the chat. Is there anything special you should do to clean out a hive that died from varroa mite?
Not really. We clean it out. Most of the time, the colony has been dead long enough where there's not really going to be any kind of transfer or concern of that. However, you do want to be aware that colonies that have high mite loads also tend to have there's a varroa virus complex that are associated. When you have a lot of varroa, there's a chance that you might have a lot of viruses that are also present. The viruses I don't think are going to stay prolonged on combs, but we don't actually have a lot of literature that says they can't, kind of pass. We know that there are bacteriums that stay in the comb, but it's always recommended that if you find colonies that you're worried about and you have concerns about, well, is there going to be disease in my comb or pesticides in my comb, and you're not really sure, just start marking the top of your frames. When you go out and you suspect there's something wrong with the brood, there's poor brood issues, maybe there's something really weird about the food stores, like they're entombing the pollen. A lot of times when we're doing these inspections, there's baby bees, there's brood in there. So you don't want to just throw it away and it's just not a great time. But what you could do is make an X or a mark, an indicator saying that, hey, there's this weird, I'm flagging this inspection. And then in the fall or in the winter or even in the spring, when we're hiving packages, if I've got combs with lots of tags on the top of it, I know that it's been through 4 or 5 inspections. And each time there's been something weird with brood disease, I'll toss and cull that comb. Because I don't really believe that we need to like replace every comb every 3 years, just like through some sort of calendar, because it's dependent on the location and how you work your bees. A stationary honey producing colony is probably going to be exposed to less chemicals than someone who's on a pollination contract route. So the need to replace comb for one operation is not going to be the same for another. So we need to be more cautious and more aware of what our bees are telling us and just make systems for us to kind of make these easy like management decisions like, oh, yeah, 3 strikes. This one is time to pitch this comb, and Luke has gone through all of our materials and put a year on all of our frames. And we're using the tag system. We just put 20 or 21 on the edge. Now we know how old they are, and we're going to start to collect some long-term data on, how quickly we need to switch out comb in an operation.
Judy, we have another question in the chat. Says, to maintain good winter ventilation, do you clean out, scrape out your bottom boards? If so, what's left in the spring? If not, how do you maintain good ventilation and openings for cleansing flights?
I think we don't use the little entrance reducer, so that might also help. Our bottom boards are modified for Marion Mouse Guard modification, which is a thinner bottom board entrance, but it's an all year round bottom board. And so it does provide plenty of great ventilation, but we also find that I don't think we have an issue with bees piling up and not being able to get out. but we also have kind of an upper entrance too. So if that does happen, they do have a way to come out. We do scrape out our bottom boards. I take a look at it and make a note of like how that colony might have died. Was it mites? Was it starvation? Was it what? So just to kind of wrap up that story, what we kind of learned from last season was that the majority of the colonies that died very visibly of mites were the ones that were the strongest ones coming back in, but had the highest brood in October. And so there were, what we think happened was that we brought them back from our out yards, treated them, brought them back to finish treatment. But I think what happened is we brought back mite bombs and they kind of exploded and died. So I think what we need to do next year is make sure we finish both rounds of treatment before we bring them back into the winter apiary. And we're also going to try to pair our treatments with drone comb because we know that there's an issue with this late swarming. So Luke's going to try to help us try to pair the two systems together. So in October, the end of October, when we can't treat because it's not going to be effective because of winter, because of the temperature anyways, hopefully most of those mites will have been trapped into the drone brood and we can just pull that comb out. So cross our fingers, we'll see if it works. We continue to improve our management each time, but if you want to make informed decisions about how to change your management, you have to kind of take the time to understand how your bees died.
Judy, we had another question that was missed earlier. It says, does losing a hive to Varroa always leave a pile of dead bees?
No, that one example, the first one I showed you with colony A, that one did not have a lot of dead bees. That's kind of what I was showing was, let's go back to this one right here. That was the bottom board. And so there's not a whole lot of bees. And this was what was in there. So there was only a small cluster of bees and what you see on the bottom board there. So, but when we did hive inspections in October, there was 12 frames of bees and 6 frames of brood. So sometime in, I'm assuming late October, November, they probably started to crash or get robbed out, or, the bees that were 12 frames could have been a mix of their own hive bees and a bunch of robbers. So a lot of times fall robbing can get really, really severe. And you might do your late fall inspections, walk away, and don't realize that you've tagged your colony for robbing, and they've just, taken a strong colony and just robbed all the resources and completely, reduced it to nothing.
And then those bees that did the robbing in turn can bring back Varroa to their own colonies. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's what happened to some of ours, those little mite bombs. Yay.
Well, it's after 6, Judy. So
have I sufficiently depressed everyone?
I thought it was informative.
That was great.
That was fun. Go out and check your bees. Sorry, Randall, what did you say?
I was just saying that your presentation was just what I wanted to hear today. So good. I'm glad.
Yeah, and enjoy. Have some fun with your bees. This is like my favorite time of the season. Packages come in, the flowers are starting to bloom. It's been forever, just waiting to get out there and get stung and be with the bees and hear the buzzing. So have some fun. And how has UNL's bee have done over winter? Oh, you know what? We've done actually pretty well, except this year. Typically we run anywhere from 60 to 85 hives, and sometimes it's in 3 apiaries and sometimes it's across 12 apiaries. We had pretty severe losses last year for 2 reasons. One, we put half of our bees into the mead project because EPA said we didn't have enough bees dying, so we had to put more bees on the property to show that they're all dying. And then the remaining hives were split pretty heavily for research. We made nukes, we had to do a bunch of stuff for teaching. And then we had the ones that were from the out yards that were strong honey producers. They're the mite bombs. Unfortunately, they're the ones that were less messed with, but the ones that came in with the most mites. So yeah, we typically will have, I think the year before last, we had about really good overwintering success. It was about 35% losses, you know, and then this year, pretty much all of our colonies because of the meat issue and how much effort we're putting into that. We've got 6 apiaries out there from 1 mile to 3 miles out, and all of them are being impacted. So unfortunately, we're buying more colonies to spread further around the community to see how far out before colonies stop dying on us. All the other apiaries do great over the summer. You know, they make honey for us. They do great. It's just this one location. Yeah, it's unfortunate. Yes, Chris. Yes, the meat issue is the ethanol plant that is processing treated crop seeds and making lots of systemic pesticide contaminated byproducts in the water and the solid. And it's been leaching through our farm station where all my honey house is, and the bees have been dying for years. So last year we figured out that there was this plant causing this pollution. So this year, the focus is on, okay, identifying exactly where those bees are coming into contact with that pollution. Yeah. Cool. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Hey, I got a quick question.
Email Randall if you have specific ideas for topics or requests.
See you Sunday, Randall.
Oh, you're right. It's Sunday. Thank you for reminding me.
It's what I do.
I swear I just looked at my calendar. Okay. Yep. Sounds good.
Cool.
I'll see you Sunday.
It'll be
Judy,
fun.
Happy Easter, everybody.
Judy, I had a really quick question from somebody in the chat. Janelle asked me specifically, if there's a mouse nest you find, do you need to do anything additionally to clean it out? She was asking about like spraying with bleach.
Most of the mouse hives that we have found have been kind of below the colony in the frame. And so most of the times when we find a mouse nest, there's minimal damage to the comb. Sometimes the mouse will chew things out and kind of scratch at it. You know, I don't think we've actually really done anything except if it really looks gross, we just kind of scrape it off, you know, scrape out the wax or just like with mold, we just kind of, if it's really dirty, we pitch it. It's not worth it, but I don't think I've ever bleached anything like that.
The bees keep the place tidy enough themselves.
Yeah, they're pretty hygienic.
Yeah.
I'd say just maybe scrape out as much as you can that you think you need to. And if it looks overly gross, just toss it, the frames. And replace them.
And then,
Judy,
and then ask Luke about the Marion mouse guard bottom boards.
Yeah, if you want to email the UNLB lab at unl.edu, I'll put it in the chat, but I can send you the link on how to build the Marion mouse guards, and they keep mice out pretty good.
Judy, can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
On Facebook, there's a group called Nebraska Through the Lens. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but somebody posted a video and picture of a bunch of cracked corn that the bees were all over. What were they trying to get out of that cracked corn?
Is it a stalk and then lots of pollen?
No, it looked like it was just like in a bucket of cracked corn. And they were just
Oh,
all over it.
yeah. Well, corn is starch and sugars. So the bees are actually foraging, probably smelling or sensing those sugars.
Okay, I just thought that was strange.
Yeah, it is. Sometimes you can add bees, you know, going to what is it, the state fair, you know, when they're all over those soda dispenser things.
Oh yeah.
Every year we get calls about, you know, bees going to sugar sources, you know, and they find the
Yeah.
oddest things.
What do you tell them when that happens? Because it's not like you can just. I've gotten a call on that before, and I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. They're gonna keep coming as long as it's there. I can't.
Yeah, we tell them that they need to clean out their trays more and just make the bees go away because there's nothing interesting.
Take the sugar out of your drinks.
Yeah, yeah. Take the sugar out of your drinks.
No problem.
Healthy for everybody. I think there was also a call one time that there was like a beekeeper had a concern about like red honey, like red colored honey, but it was a food colorant.
In New York?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The bees got into some artificial, like, you know, food syrup, and it had colorant in it and was bringing it back. I don't know if you can actually label that as honey then, right? Because then
I think technically on paper you could, because you're
but it's
not
not
at.
coming from a floral source.
Oh, I don't know.
There is
I
that.
wouldn't try to sell it.
Yeah, I'd almost think you
Ready?
label it as like, you know, contains artificial ingredients or something.
Well, I'm gonna just put like trays of Coca-Cola, like dried Coca-Cola syrup outside my hive, and see if I can get Coca-Cola flavored honey. Or something.
Nice.
Like red 40 honey.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna head out. Jacob, I will see you. It'll noon my time, 10 a.m. California time on Saturday, on Sunday.
It'll be fun.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Everybody,
Judy
Thank
can
you,
tell
guys.
you we're a good audience.
thank you.